Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the absolute coolest mysteries in biology. Why do high-revving birds live so much longer than mammals? Think about a bird's body for a second. It's basically a high-performance race car. It drives extremely fast, literally all day long. Now, if you drove a regular car that hard, you'd completely burn up the engine, right? You'd have this thick, toxic, black exhaust smoke pouring out, and eventually the whole vehicle would just be ruined. But somehow, birds totally defy this logic. So today, we're going to unpack exactly how they pull off this incredible biological feat.
To really wrap our heads around the scale of this mystery, we kind of have to compare the mammalian minivan to the avian race car. By all the standard rules of biological engineering, a bird's body, with its sky-high temperature and super-fast metabolism, should basically burn out way faster than a mammal's. They run at significantly higher core temperatures, their hearts are beating at just incredible rates, and their blood glucose levels? Well, in a mammal, those levels would be considered frankly diabetic. But here's the kicker. Despite all this constant, intense physiological stress, they routinely outlive mammals of similar sizes by decades.
So this brings us to the ultimate paradox. If birds are running their biological engines so incredibly hot, why on earth do they live so much longer than us? Why doesn't the engine just melt down? Well, to solve this, we actually need to shrink ourselves down and take a microscopic journey right into the actual engine of their cells.
All right, meet the mitochondria. You probably remember them from high school biology as the powerhouses of the cell, right? They're the high-performance engines driving almost everything an organism does. In fact, they're responsible for generating roughly 90% of your cellular energy in the form of a tiny molecule called ATP. Simply put, without these microscopic engines, our race car isn't going anywhere.
And right at the very core of this engine is the electron transport chain. It's this highly complex system of proteins built directly into the inner mitochondrial membrane. This is where the actual fuel combustion happens. It's the microscopic machinery taking the food we eat and the oxygen we breathe and converting it into real, usable, driving energy.
The mechanics of how this works are just elegant. First, electrons from our food are passed down a chain of protein complexes. Think of it kind of like a microscopic bucket brigade. As these electrons move, they power these pumps that push protons across the membrane, which builds up a massive amount of pressure. Then finally, those protons forcefully flow back through this specialized, spinning molecular turbine, called ATP synthase. As that turbine spins, it churns out the ATP energy the cell needs to actually survive.
But there's a catch. Just like a real-world high-performance car engine, this cellular powerhouse creates a deadly exhaust. As those electrons are bouncing down the chain, some of them inevitably leak out. And when these leaked electrons react with oxygen, they form what are called reactive oxygen species, or ROS. You might have heard of superoxide radicals. Basically, this is the biological equivalent of thick, toxic black engine smoke.
So the really crucial point here is that this ROS exhaust is incredibly destructive. Because it's so reactive, it essentially rusts the cell from the inside out. It oxidizes crucial proteins, it literally rips apart the protective lipid membranes of the cell, and worst of all, it severely damages the mitochondrial DNA sitting right next to the engine. Over time, this accumulating damage is the exact thing that accelerates the aging process and leads to cell death. In mammals like us, this toxic exhaust is what eventually shuts our engines down for good.
But check this out. When we actually measured the production rates of that toxic ROS exhaust, specifically hydrogen peroxide, the contrast is just staggering. Look at pigeons and parakeets. They produce a mere fraction of the toxic waste compared to similarly sized rats and mice. The birds are producing drastically less of this damaging exhaust, even though, remember, their engines are running much, much faster.
And here is the profound real-world result of having that clean running engine. Because they produce so little toxic exhaust, the oxidative rusting of their cells is incredibly slow. This dramatic reduction in cellular exhaust allows a pigeon to live a healthy, high-flying life for up to 35 years. Meanwhile, a rat, whose cells are just suffocating in high ROS production, burns out and dies in just 4 short years.
So we have to ask, how exactly do birds achieve this astonishingly low exhaust while running their metabolism so high? If their turbine is spinning faster than ours, why isn't it leaking more electrons and making more toxic smoke? Well, the answer lies in an absolutely incredible evolutionary adaptation. They have a biological exhaust valve.
The secret here is actually intentional inefficiency. Now, mammals, we primarily use what's called coupled respiration. This tightly binds electron flow to ATP production. It maximizes fuel efficiency, sure, but it builds immense protonic pressure, which creates high levels of that toxic ROS. Birds, on the other hand, utilize uncoupled respiration. They're actively willing to sacrifice just a little bit of fuel efficiency to save their cells from long-term toxic damage.
Here's exactly how that biological exhaust valve operates. Avian mitochondria heavily utilize specialized uncoupling proteins like UCP or another one called ANT. When the pressure, the membrane potential, gets dangerously high, right before electrons would normally leak out and form that toxic smoke, these proteins open up. They intentionally leak protons back across the membrane without passing them through the energy turbine. So it short-circuits the system just enough to drop the internal pressure. Yes, the engine loses a tiny bit of horsepower, but it completely stops the toxic ROS exhaust from ever forming. It keeps the engine perfectly clean.
This beautifully dynamic, self-regulating machinery actually forces us to totally rethink how we view these cellular engines. Because if they can actively sense pressure and open relief valves to protect the cell, well, they're far more complex than we originally thought. They are definitely not just dumb engines or isolated power plants.
Historically, a lot in the models depicted mitochondria as these isolated, static little batteries just floating around in the cytosol. But as this brilliant quote from our source material points out, mitochondria are not static structures. They undergo fusion and fission processes driven by the energetic status of the cell. They are incredibly dynamic. They're constantly shape-shifting, merging together, and pulling apart based on exactly what the body needs in real time.
They're actually vast, intelligent communication networks. Thanks to electron tomography, we now know they weave through the cell as long, tube-like structures, plugging directly into the nucleus to communicate. And here's perhaps the most amazing twist of all. They actually use tiny, highly controlled puffs of that ROS exhaust as a chemical language. In low, carefully managed doses, ROS isn't toxic at all. It's a vital signal that tells the rest of the cell when to repair its DNA, when to adapt to stress, and even tells our immune system when to fight infections. The bird doesn't just eliminate the exhaust, it meticulously controls it to keep the entire cellular city communicating perfectly.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to remember these 3 vital takeaways from the avian world. First, 100% efficiency isn't always optimal. Sometimes introducing a biological leak or a little inefficiency is exactly what saves the entire system. Second, the things we think of as toxic, like ROS exhaust, exist on a spectrum. In massive doses, sure, they rust our cells and cause aging. But in small, controlled puffs, they are the very signals that keep us alive. And third, the secret of the avian race car proves that expertly managing cellular exhaust, rather than just maximizing energy, is the absolute key to extreme longevity.
Which leaves us with one incredibly exciting, open-ended question for the future of biology and medicine. If we now know that avian cells use these built-in exhaust valves to drastically slow down the rusting of their engines, could reprogramming human mitochondria to do the exact same thing finally unlock the ultimate secrets to human longevity? It is a fascinating thought, and it all starts with looking closely at the birds flying right outside our windows. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the incredible machinery inside